the curator back on Thursday, my favorite day, because it is time for Bitcoin and politics. But before I get to that, let me bring up our sponsor, Roundly X. Guys, listen, go over to roundlyx.com. You can actually plug in your debit card, credit card, and after that, it's super simple. You go on about your daily life doing what you always do. Everything runs in the background. And if you go over there and you use Bitcoin in politics, you're going to get $4 in Bitcoin. Hey, listen, right now, you probably will get a lot of sats because the price is peaking right now. So why don't you do that? And let's get on with the show. All right, folks, today I'm going to have a couple of guests because guess what we're going to be talking about today? Our favorite topic, CBDCs, central bank digital currency. A lot of people have a lot of questions about this. There's a lot of uneasiness about it. We all think the government's going to control us and lock us down and they're going to take control of our lives. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So today I have on the show a colleague of mine named Alexandre Lores. He is from Quantum Economics, and we're going to, as well as the latest block, but we're going to be talking about CBDCs. And then also we're going to have Nick, our producer, on the show to also talk about it. But hey, why don't we kick things off with Alexandre getting a little bit about his background, and then we'll dive in.
Great, thanks, Paul.
Hey,
it's exciting to be here. Great to talk to you again. Look, I got involved. I've been a math nerd since I was a kid, and I got into stocks again with Robinhood back in 2016. It was kind of the popular thing to do. Markets are going well, so I got into that. And then a friend introduced me to Bitcoin as well as Ethereum and XRP back in 2017. And of course, it was the beginning of the bull run, so I guess you could say I came for the money, but I stayed for the technology because I'm, again, fascinated with computers, and the concept of, computerized, decentralized internet money is just too exciting to pass. I began writing, more directly. I created the latestblock.com crypto news site, basically a news aggregator, and then I started writing my own articles, did analysis on different coins, mostly focused on Bitcoin and Ethereum, as well as some other economic issues. So been doing that kind of more seriously since February of 2021. And as you know, we were together in Quantum Economics, so we've been talking about a number of different subjects, a lot of hot topics, and I think a lot of noise, and along with that, some actually important topics that I'm glad we can discuss instead of the latest thing which kind of grabs attention,
That's true. So true. So true. Yeah, Nick, I had the opportunity to meet Alexandre down at Bitcoin Miami 2022. That was an awesome time. Just phenomenal conference. Like, it blew my mind. There was so much stuff going on, but we had an opportunity to hang out during different parts of the sessions. And yeah, it was just great meeting him in person. Hopefully at one point I get to meet you too, Nick. But hey, Nick, tell the folks about yourself a little bit.
Well, I'm the producer of BitcoinLive, and now and then I'll jump into these shows just for the fun of it. But also I love a good discussion, and I'm very interested in CBDCs. And of course, later in the evening, we have another show with Board Becky, but I'll leave that for what it is. I can't wait to have this discussion.
Awesome. Well, the name of the show, of course, Will CBDCs Fail? And that's the question that I think we're all trying to sort of grapple with, and I think a lot of us would like for that to be the case. We want them to fail. Either one of you guys, why do you guys want CBDCs to fail?
Alexandre?
I'll jump in there. Well, first of all, one thing we've been discussing offline or online on some DMs, the concept of CBDCs represent, to me at least, this concept of a centrally controlled digital currency, essentially harnessing the technology that is obvious in Bitcoin and using it for a purpose which is the opposite of what Bitcoin was created for. It's not so much the name CBDC, it's not so much what it is, but how it's implemented, right? You technically don't need a CBDC to completely enslave everybody financially, right? You don't need a CBDC to implement a social credit system. You don't need a CBDC to block your protesters from, starving them out like was done in Canada. And it's scary enough within Canada, democratic country, a lot of concern over, the financial controls implemented on the truckers. And then now you see Iran, a country well known to us in the West as being oppressive to human rights, especially to women, ordering, banks to close down the accounts of any women, seen not wearing a hijab. And I'm sure that, concept of due process, I'm sure if somebody says they did something, I'm going to just assume due process isn't going to be applied, right? Or there may even not be true. So you can do these things, these oppressive things, you have a total dominated, totally controlled, totally surveilled police state without having a CBDC as such. But we generally think of CBDCs as, the first pilot that's furthest along is the digital yuan in China. So we generally kind of view it as such. Will there be some form of digital dollar going forward? At least in almost every country, most certainly, whether it's called a CBDC or not. I'm starting to see, as much as I've been railing against CBDCs, it's starting to see it's more important not necessarily what it's called, but how exactly it's implemented and our basic privacy protections of the individual protected. I'm not so much concerned over large corporations. You see, like an FTX or if you're transacting with some billion-dollar corporation, you're moving, $50 million across borders or something. I understand, the sensible government need to observe that and investigate what's happening if there's a nefarious purpose. But, sending each other $700, I see absolutely zero need, or even Europe, it's $1,000. I'm against this because there's really no need for a government to be investigating such a thing. If somebody is so evil that they need to be looked into that deeply, they're doing something else, so you don't need to use that method to look into them. Like if they're a murderer or a kidnapper, like you can use some other means to find them other than who they sent $700 to. So, yeah, it's my biggest concern, and the CBDC represents, in most situations, I think there's some outliers in the Caribbean and in Africa, but in most situations, it's more has the purpose of a government kind of controlled, some sort of government assistance and support, but that's also tightly controlled, tightly surveilled, and tightly policed, which I think is not somewhere where I'd like to see society go.
Right. Yeah, and I completely agree with what Alexander said. I don't know much to add to it, but I would say within certain conditions, and I think Alexander also talked about that on Twitter, within certain conditions, CBDC could perhaps work if it's tightly regulated and with the right technical safeguards, but also especially within a decentralized framework, right? If Bitcoin dominates, or if you have like a truly decentralized system within which CBDCs could operate, that would clearly limit their malfunction, so to speak. But that is a very difficult battle to be fought.
Yeah, one of the things interesting is that, I've been tracking the whole news information that's been involved in around CBDCs for the last couple of months. But, some of the use cases, as much as we talk about this technology, and as Alexander mentioned, he talked about, the fact that it's not necessarily the name, it's how it's implemented. So in some cases, stimulus checks, welfare programs, cross-border payments, the fact that it does prevent money laundering. I mean, some of these use cases, CBDCs really can help with those situations. But I do understand that could be taken too far, right? And that's the concern that we have, is that will a government take this too far and not only use it for these types of purposes, but I think there are some good in CBDCs if implemented properly, right?
Well,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's the big question, right? I mean, can you really regulate a CBDC? I mean, because I think Bitcoin is like a really truly decentralized open source. I would say cryptocurrency, but the Bitcoin maxis will probably kill me. But it's like it's truly decentralized, right? So the question is, can a CBDC be truly decentralized and open source? Because only if they sort of have those two aspects, at least those two aspects, then you can safely transact in them. And of course also private. I think you shared that CK Snark article, sorry. Is it possible to truly keep money private, because you do need privacy for an economy to work?
Yeah, those are good points, and I just want to add. Okay, so first of all, I think the importance of Bitcoin being decentralized is key. I don't think any currency from a government is ever going to be decentralized and transparent, and I don't think it needs to be. The government's goal is to, any government, whether it's a good government or bad government, in the end of the day, it's a bit of an organism in a way that has a lifeblood, and that includes the urge to control. It's part of its job, not necessarily all evil, but it's going to implement as much control over individual citizens as it can, and it's not necessarily going to want that kind of back end to be transparent. It's going to want it to be opaque. It's going to want the civilians to be transparent, the citizens, right? So what's, I think, needful is the option, the choice, having a Bitcoin. As regards to other cryptocurrencies, I think there's many different bags. Kind of look at what's viewed as crypto right now is kind of the VC pump and dump, the 2017 ICOs. That's 99% of them, and a lot of it is cash grab, and some of it maybe is connect to valid projects. It's speculative, and some of it, like Monero, came from before and is actually decentralized proof of work, but less supported than Bitcoin, right? So Monero is actually, one could argue, more decentralized than Bitcoin, but its support is very small comparatively, right? And Bitcoin's actually got enough factors that it could be openly allowed and kind of pushed by government. Monero's a little bit too sharp on the privacy side, right? But point is, having the alternative is important. It's not so much that, okay, the government is going to have a form of money that they can exert control on. I don't have a problem against that. The fact that you have an alternative to opt out if they go out, off the rails, if they abuse their power, which has happened, for thousands of years and from all political spectrums. I'm not saying that every government plans to abuse power, but it's a possibility. And there's even people that don't intend to abuse power that do eventually abuse power because of being forced into emergency situations. So there's a million and one things we can talk about, politics and this and that, but having the alternative is the most important thing, protecting the privacy of the individuals. If someone wants to have self-custody of their Bitcoin, absolutely, that must be protected. The concept that you're forced to hold it in a Chase Bank or something is absurd. And obviously that wouldn't prevent the next FTX, because FTX literally was custodying people's Bitcoin. Supposedly they were lying about it, right? They were just gambling the money away and giving you an IOU. But at the end of the day, the individual must be given the opportunity to opt out of any political system, whether we're talking about money or not. That's true freedom. And that will encourage them to participate in that political system if they have a right to step out of it. Otherwise, that's a form of, what do you want to call it, oppression, slavery, tyranny, authoritarianism. No one likes that concept personally, right? So I think that's important to protect the right of citizens to use Bitcoin, or if they want to use another form of crypto. I think it's simplest to focus on Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is a great example of something that's truly decentralized. While the participants in it, there is a speculative angle to the price. It's not founded on the speculative aspect, like any sort of, if you're starting a business, there's a speculation there, right? If you're an entrepreneur, there is a speculative factor, and your goal is to make money. There's lots of people on Bitcoin that are speculating on price that want to make money, but its foundation is a computer network. If you're talking about Solana or some other crypto that was ICO or VC funded, it's kind of a business backed on a speculative goal, right? That, of course, we're going to get in early, we're going to boom this business, we're going to make tons of money. So that takes away from a bit of the purity of a sort of money, right? And Bitcoin in itself has that. There's a few others that have that quality, but again, as I mentioned, they're not as supported, like Monero. There's some other kind of essentially Bitcoin forks like Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, that attempted to improve on features. And in each case, they failed to garner as much support, I think, because kind of have the original, which is Bitcoin. You have Satoshi as the founder, who's, a mysterious entity, which adds value to the whole game, right? And there's no Satoshi going around pumping his bags, right? Like you have with, every other founder of any business really would be doing. And a lot of cryptocurrencies truly are businesses, so they lose that independent factor.
Yeah.
Paul? Yeah, when you look at it too, we have two successful projects that are in play, right? You got China and you got Nigeria. Both of them have a CBDC. And so when we look at those two projects, it does make you wonder. It seems like they seem to be running okay so far. It hasn't been a huge outcry, except for in Nigeria, we did see some pushback. But in China, have you guys seen a lot of pushbacks or a lot of nefarious stuff happening with these CBDCs so far?
I mean, one thing I noticed, yeah, so I'll jump in if that's all right, Nick. Well, for one, not on that subject, but there has been a significant amount of pushback on the new kind of very harsh COVID regulations, as you saw. And there was a situation with people, I think 6 months ago at a bank, they actually brought in the army and tanks to disperse them, and even called it a public health emergency to disperse them, because they basically had a situation similar to Celsius or FTX where the bank rugged them and there was no backing to fund them. So actually, like, you can't have your own funds. So there's definitely general outcry, I think, and protest greater than I've seen in my entire life from China. Not on the CBDC. I think it started out, if you want people to use new money, just give it to them for free, right? So I don't think anyone's complained about, if somebody gave you $1,000 in a wallet right now, that was the Fed coin, there's not going to be that much of an outcry unless you're deeply, rooted in the philosophy of it, right? Most people won't complain about being given free money. So I think that's what the pilot's been. It hasn't been probably not converting your money. It's been, here's some free money. So they also, I saw there was a headline that they apparently did announce, reportedly there was a deadline date. So use your money by this date or we're zeroing it out. So that was an interesting factor I've heard a number of us bring up about CBDCs, that they control the wallet so they can turn it off, right? Now, will they then extend that to turning it off when, let's say, you're alleged that you ran a red light, or that you did something wrong, but no actual trial has been, you haven't been convicted of a wrongdoing, but could you be debited until further notice? So that's, again, the concern, that will that play up in the future? Of course, we're speculating, but if that would go to suspend the rule of law and innocent until proven guilty that we have in the U.S., I would find that to be negative. In China, I don't think that principle even exists, so I don't know that anyone would know enough to protest about it.
Yeah, and I think with CBDCs, the effect that they have can be very sort of nefarious, right? So it might not be visible at first instance, but the longer you use them, especially in China, right? I mean, in China, it has been clearly designed with the purpose to create this harmonic society, right? So it was, from the outset, it was a social credit system. And it was intentionally built that way to sort of improve the harmony in society. But once you get it started, even if you don't build it with that specific intention, it can sort of work around the rule of law, right? I mean, especially if it's in the hands of a central bank and you can control the money directly in everybody's wallet, right? It can sort of set the whole political game to its hand. So even though you might have rules in place to sort of regulate a CBDC, if the central bank controls the money that the politicians use, and it can directly enter their wallet, all these rules are basically nonsense. So that's why the regulation, and especially the technical setup, is extremely important when you sort of introduce a CBDC, because even if you have like an exit like Bitcoin and it's allowed to operate and you have on and off ramps for people, if a CBDC is not well regulated, it could exert extreme control on every individual of society and make it very hard for even Bitcoin holders to sort of influence the politics in a country that's set up around a CBDC system.
Yeah, speaking of those countries, there are a numerous amount of countries right now. And this is why, again, I think if people think that this is not happening, it is. Because as we mentioned, the people that are countries currently using is China and Nigeria. But of course, there's been successful pilots in Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE. And then we've had a whole host of countries announcing pilots like Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, South Africa, the Bank of Ghana, right? Thailand, India, Japan, France, Luxembourg, Spain. And then we have others that are indicating that they're going to start working on one, whether that's Saudi Arabia, France, Taiwan, Israel, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Canada, Ukraine, Indonesia, Pakistan, right? So you start looking, this is a global effort to begin to push out this CBDC. And Dan Held and I'm gonna forget her name, but they wrote a paper and they talked about the CBDCs and the development. That's what got me started on trying to track a lot of this. But we've also had some countries sort of give up on CBDC. Denmark, Ecuador, and Finland. Those countries have said, you know what, we're giving up on this whole CBDC thing. So it is going to be interesting to see how, as Alex says, how will this actually be implemented? And I think that that's going to determine if we get true pushback from the people. Because as we talked about earlier in the show, yes, ZK proofs have come out, and they're talking about now if they push that into CBDCs, that could very well quell a lot of uproar that people have. You guys feel comfortable if they launch the CBDC here in the States or in your country and they did it with ZK proof?
Sorry. No, I'm just too much against CBDCs. I think it's too dangerous. But I do recognize that they're here and that lots of countries are using them, and I can also recognize that you could theoretically use them for good, right? I mean, but I think the impulse to abuse it would be too great, and I'm not technical enough to sort of see if that would be enough of a safeguard to prevent the abuse from happening.
Yeah.
I would vote the same. I mean, I'm not schooled enough in ZK proofs of have a gloss over the technology, but I would be suspect there would be some, I'm sure you'd need to do KYC to get the thing registered. There'd be some form of, while the transaction itself might not be tracked, I assume it would be done on some sort of service provider where it would be tracked. So I don't buy it. I think it's inevitable in some form. So I'm more, again, not a fan, but I'm more concerned of how it's done. I mean, like the law that was just proposed, which I think is really a nothing burger, because Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act from Warren and Marshall, bipartisan, to basically target privacy using FTX as an excuse. It's bipartisan, so it would need to have significant support on, at least some support on both sides, and Lummis went out and said it's not getting approved. So it's a nothing burger. It's just simply not going to get approved. You only need, there's almost nothing in the U.S. Congress or Senate that's going to have massive bipartisan support. I think the only things were daylight savings, and there was enough of infrastructure that the Republicans were willing to work. A few of them were willing to work. That was, you'd need like 10 of them. There's too much in this way, self-interest actually protects us from the government doing disastrous things, because there's enough politicians that see that they can exert enough control on their own agendas that they will block things that are deeply unpopular. And in this case, even though it's got a Republican on one side, you have Elizabeth Warren, who's extremely unpopular with even left-leaning crypto folks, obviously, because they're deeply rooted stance. And she's considered, I believe, more on the progressive side. So it would be extremely difficult for her to push anything that gets Republican support. And this Lummis went out and said, no way. So I don't see, I see that as simply making a stance. She made a point. She can go back to her voters and say, I stood up against these bad, FTX and these criminals by pushing this law. It didn't get approved, but I'm fighting, it's this kind of thing. So nothing burger, but that kind of implementation is terrifying. It would take something severe. Things have happened. I think FTX isn't severe enough. Like 9/11, for example, was obviously extremely traumatizing for the nation. So you had the Patriot Act being passed shortly, and I think if you look at the voting rolls, normally the Republicans at that time, the Republicans would have generally all voted for it, and I think Ron Paul is the only one that said no way. More really libertarian that went under the umbrella of Republicans, and something like 7 or 8 Democrats, which normally would not vote for such a thing. At the time, the Democrats were a lot more on the liberal side, the anti-war side, yet they all kind of jumped on immediately because it was such a disaster and the voters put such a pressure on them. The public sentiment was so deeply strong. In this case, I think while it's everything that's happened with FTX is a disaster for crypto, shades light on crypto and to some degree Bitcoin. It's not bullish, but it's not so much that its public support isn't deeply against Bitcoin or crypto as a result. I think most people are smart enough to see this guy scam people. There was enough influencers that were kind of, secretly shilling it. This shouldn't have been. I think Kevin O'Leary is going to lose a lot of credibility. But at the end of the day, you'd need something like 70, 80% of America wanting to like burn down crypto, that something like that could happen. So we're nowhere close to that in my.
Yeah, looking at regulation, our good friend over at Cap Hill Crypto, George, he's been tracking all the legislation. I just want to run through some of these pieces of legislation because there are 5 different bills in the House, and we've got about 4 in the Senate that address CBDCs. The first is an automatic boost to communities act, which was put in with the sponsor for that was Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat out of Michigan. And then we have HR 2211, which is the CBDC Study Act of 2021. And that was done by, again, a Democrat up in Illinois to study CBDCs to see if they could be implemented. The HR 3506 was a 21st Century Dollar Act, and that was put in by French Hill. He's a Republican of Arkansas. There's 2 bills, one in the House, one in the Senate, both addressing the prohibiting CBDCs. One done by Representative Tom Emmer, Republican from Minnesota, and then of course the Senate, Ted Cruz, my congressman, senator, who's put that in place. And then there's a couple just minor ones. eCash Act, that's HR 7231, Stephen Lynch, Democrat of Massachusetts. And then Defending America's from CBDCs Act. This is the one deals with stopping CBDCs in other countries like China from impacting us. And that was done by Tom Cotton out of Arkansas. And then, of course, No Digital Dollar Act by James Langford of Oklahoma. So there is a substantial amount of legislation in Congress pending right now to combat CBDCs. Will be interesting based on what you just said, Alex. Is this just some of these politicians' ways of saying, hey, listen, we tried to fight against the bad people and it doesn't pass? Or do you think any of this has any chance of making it through?
I think that's a great point. And the dynamics of Congress is something to look at. Most people in this country look at it from a personal political view and get very feisty about it. But let's look at the exact dynamics. You have a Democrat president with really you're looking at a very strong focus on the administration, right? Trump was more of a bit of a wildcat who kind of, some of the things you could tell he was doing what he felt was right against the advisors. I think Biden is more the traditional, deeply immersed in analysis and reports from advisors. So you're looking at Janet Yellen and her team that just put together the Treasury Secretary. So that's the president, and they have definitely pushed with executive orders to regulate crypto and to not necessarily go out and say we need a CBDC, but go out and do the research and find out if this is important for America's competitiveness in the future world, right? So there's been a moderate to strong focus on at least exploring that. And then you have a Congress which was Democrat, now it's slightly Republican, right? Or will be when they take office. They haven't officially, don't know the day, but that'll come soon. And then you have a Senate, which a slight Democrat gain. Again, it looked like there was another seat added because in Georgia, the Republicans held that and they flipped a seat in another state. But what's wild is that Sinema from Arizona, who's a Democrat who's been blocked a few of the spending measures of the Democrats, is now said she's an independent. So generally that may or may not mean big. There's actually two other independents that generally vote with the Democrats in the Senate. It's actually the third one. So technically there's actually 48 Democrats. There's 3 left-leaning independents and there's 49 Republicans, right? So, and in a 50-50 split, the vice president, who's Kamala Harris, the Democrat, would be the tie-breaking vote, for those who don't know. And in the Senate, for North America, this is not absolute, but most laws that are broad in scope that don't just deal with the budget have to have 60 votes, right? If you're going to have some, vast law change. So that means that there's very few of those that are going to get pushed through unless there's, you'd need at least 10 Republicans essentially to support it and all of the Democrats or vice versa. So now the budget, which has to do with government spending, they need to have a majority of votes. So they either need 51 votes out of those 100, or they need a 50-50 split, and then the vice president could then cast a tiebreaker. So it would need to be something that essentially the Democrats would want to push through as very important. So, and then for those, again, who are not familiar, the Democrats generally by survey in the US seem to have a bit more of the popularity and focus on social programs, the environment, et cetera. The Republicans are generally viewed as more pro-business and pro-economy. So depending on which issues to the forefront, that's actually kind of the foundation. Aside from right now, you're seeing a lot of, I would say TV show on both sides. But that's actually more the fundamental issue, right? And so it's going to be extremely difficult to push anything through. And the at least the Republicans I'm familiar with that you mentioned are not necessarily the ones that are known for getting bipartisan support, except for Rep. Tom Emmer, who does a lot of bipartisan work but he's in the Congress, in the lower house, and she's done a lot of work with Democrats on the blockchain caucus. So he's one that I think is known for stepping over the line, teaming up with a Democrat, doing the kind of let's work together thing. Ted Cruz is definitely more known for his dramatic defense of the right and things that he feels his voters have mandated. So I believe you have someone like her and someone like Rashida Tlaib is on the left. While she may be doing as bipartisan, she's seen as kind of a member of the squad. So I think whether the law was about, giving everybody shoelaces or something extremely innocuous, I believe Republicans would deliberately vote against it just on a basis of the way politics are right now. Just like Trump is going to go out and say something, you're not going to get a bunch. AOC is not going to go jump up and say, I agree, even if she did agree on the issue, right? So I think Tom Emmer is the most likely to have someone that's bipartisan, someone like Cynthia Lummis. She's definitely strong in her position on the right, but she has stepped aside, crossed the line. Her and Gillibrand were trying to put through this bill, which I think had a lot of contribution from SBF. So I think that's kind of dead in this. So, but I think it's a lot of show. I think the good news is the worst case scenario for CBDCs is so unlikely because the amount of, really a divided government, which I think is in a good way. For example, going way back, the economy, I think, did well in the Clinton years, the strong Republican Congress and the strong Democrat president that basically worked together. So when they work together, it's really hard to push, there's so many different agendas, it's not really two parties, there's like many different groups in those parties, but when you have it that evenly divided, I think the most sensible policies, or at least the most popular ones, are the only ones that are likely to push through. So I'm not concerned about any major draconian, totalitarian laws coming out here. At least in the
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and that's exactly what I was thinking about is that the next couple of years, because of the current status of things right now, I don't think we're really going to see much getting done and much getting passed, especially when it's something as, as difficult as like a CBDC trying to get passed through Congress. So I think for the time being, I think we here in the US for the most part are safe. The one bill that did get a lot of bipartisan support so far, with the sponsor being Haggerty, and then they've got, I think it's maybe like 16 co-sponsors on a bill, is the one that's looking at the impact of the China CBDC on the US. And so I can see something like that possibly slipping itself into one of the other bills where we say, listen, we're going to take a hard stance on the impact that another country's CBDC will have on our citizens. And so in that light, I think it's, it's pretty good from that perspective. But I agree with you. It's going to be really, really tough to see any type of meaningful regulation passed. And this is what Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, was saying, is that if we had some type of reasonable regulation in place, the whole FTX debacle probably wouldn't happen. But they're going to have to come together and figure something out soon, or we might very well have more problems going forward.
Well, one of my worries is, I think you're probably right about America. I think there's another reason why America might not embrace CBDCs, because it's not really necessary. Because when you look into the future, and this sort of has to do more with economics and finance, America is pretty well positioned, right, going forward in this new sort of global, or basically deglobalizing world. So they're pretty well off, actually. So there's not really a need for a CBDC, because usually a CBDC, especially in the negative sense, is to exert control, right, on your population. So that would make much more sense in China, for example, or Russia, or even in Europe, with a lot of escalation of probably demonstrations and protests and other kind of mayhem that might erupt. So, but I do think, moving forward, Americans might worry about if the whole world goes onto a CBDC system, except for America and El Salvador. Right, what will that do with America, right? Because then they can say, like, okay, the whole world is on the CBDC system, maybe we should go on it too. And also, I think when you look at what central banks are talking about, the Bank of International Settlements, they basically want to make all these CBDCs interoperable, right? So basically, it is one system. It's not different CBDCs. It's basically one system operating underneath all these CBDCs. So that would also worry me from an international perspective, even if you're an American.
Right.
I think there's some good points.
I was saying, when you're looking at this we've been looking at it from a government perspective. What about the people perspective? Like, Alex, do you see what is that we can do? Are you seeing anything developing when it comes to voters, or how we look at this? Because what I think happens a lot with these types of situations is the people just cry and complain about what the government's doing. Like, there's nothing we can do. Is there anything we can do, or are you seeing any trends developing, or yeah?
Yeah, that's a great point. And you reminded me of one thing, just comment on what you said as well. One thing that has broad bipartisan support is the issue of China and resistance to or competition with China. So I think that is exactly why, like you mentioned, that could go through. Okay, so back to the everyday person. I mean, look, we have an interesting economy where it's not quite a recession, but we had like kind of fast growth and then inflation way above wage growth. So there's a lot more frustrated people, a lot more people with, credit card debt piling up that, I think are probably getting sick of both the right and the left. Stepping away from politics, I think the best people that are there are still out in the space, like you, like me, like Wendy O, that are working hard to educate, show like, okay, this is what the technology is. This is what this criminal did and committed scam and fraud. They're not the same thing. What are the benefits of having Bitcoin? What are the benefits of these decentralized technologies? We'll not mention the others, but Like what's the value? And it's harder work right now. It is a bear market, and I think it's going to stay that way for a couple of years. And that goes for even tech companies outside of crypto. It's not the environment we've had for 20 years. So figuring out how to help people, figuring out how to improve the economic situation of every person individually, which includes back to our old formula here, create value, collect some of it, and live frugally and invest the surplus, and you build yourself some security. If every American does that, that will, maybe it'll make it so we're less rich, each of us, but it'll make for a stronger, safer country, and more able to withstand, economic shocks and bad news and such. So any, individual person who's working hard to create value, help educate others with truthful data, whether it's about Bitcoin or just basic economic knowledge, or even, work, vocational training, help people get back to work, get more, remunerative jobs, I think is the best thing here in America. And I think I just wrote an article about Kenya, looking at, I think that's a really good thing that could help stabilize economies and prevent them from getting too much inflation or too much deflation or recession or whatever. The basis of any economic system is people delivering value. So whether that's Bitcoin that greases those rails as an efficient payment form or store of value, or that's a dollar, or that's, Chuck E. Cheese credits, whatever that is, it's still made stronger by that basic foundation. So just keep educating. We'll do our best, keep putting out the true data and reaching as many people as we can, so we can move forward as, a society kind of moving together and not, leaving less people behind, so to speak.
Yeah, I find it interesting when you look at, so I think it was Nayib Bukele, president of El Salvador, that came out, and I don't know if this is still true or not, but it's very interesting. I think we sort of forgotten that these news cycles move so fast. So it's like, wow, that was just yesterday he said that. But he says we're going to be buying a Bitcoin a day, right? Bitcoin a day.
Yeah,
that's significant. That's right. How great would it be if every citizen in the U.S. were to buy $1 worth of Bitcoin every day? You're looking at $200 million going into Bitcoin every single solitary day. How great would that be? And that's not that hard to do when you think about it. $1 a day, I could do $1 a day, $7 a week, right? This is less than, $30, right? So if we could do that on a daily basis, could you imagine how we could shift the actual impact? And I don't know, I'm assuming, but then you look at that globally, if we did this, that would be massive. And I think one of the things that we can do when we look at CBDCs is we have a peaceful protest. We can opt out of the system by just buying Bitcoin. Simple as that. And I think a lot of people miss that. Nick?
That's huge.
Yeah, I think you're right. But from a psychological perspective, right, telling people to put $1 into something, they'll never do that ever. So, people only do something like if they think it has it works, right, in the short to near term. So then they would put in more. But then, of course, Bitcoin is low right now, and they're being told that Bitcoin is basically going away. It's irrelevant, as the ECB says. So it's very difficult, of course, to make that happen. But I totally agree, right? If everybody would do that, that would make the whole CBDC proposition go away. Because you could have like a really sort of tame, nice CBDC if Bitcoin was really big, right? And it would be sort of the system itself. Then they could mess around with CBDCs all day long, right? I wouldn't care if they did. But the problem is right now, in comparison, Bitcoin is too small compared to the damage they could do with CBDC wrongly designed. And I think when you look at the world and the economics at the moment, everything is sort of geared up the wrong way. And it's sort of, I think it would be very hard for them not to abuse this power once it's in their hands. And I think they'll assure us that they'll never do it, and they'll only use it for good, and they'll point to the Bahamas and to those countries that already have a CBDC and it's working. But I think it's our goal, our yeah, we should, like you say, educate people on CBDCs and educate each other. If you're listening to this, tell people what CBDCs are actually. Very dangerous, and you want sound money, hard money, and just look at the fiat system, right? Educate yourself on the fiat system first, and do it quickly, and then you understand how much worse a CBDC could be.
I think it's easy to educate people on the fiat system right now because of what happened with, money printing and then, quantitative easing, now quantitative tightening, and the pain on the way down,
Yeah, that's what I hope. Yeah. So I really hope that people are paying attention, but I'm also kind of afraid that they take the wrong lesson, right? So they see the pain, they feel the pain, and then they ask the government to take away the pain, and then they ask them, print more money.
Print more, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, as we wrap this show, up, and for the folks that are watching, thank you so much for watching. Definitely check out my website, cryptocurator.com. Definitely follow Alexandre Lores on Twitter as well as BitcoinLive, because that's where you're going to get all the information. As we get ready to wrap up, I do want to both of your views on the existing place we are right now with Bitcoin. Do you think we're at a macro bottom? Do you think this thing's going to recover? And if so, how long it's going to take?
That's tough. Look, I think we're close to the bottom, but I said that when we're at 30,000. So, and I said that at 20,000. So I don't know, it could go lower. I don't think we're going to see any major bull run until interest rates start coming down. So I think we're a year or two away from that. And we get a year or two of, really, Bitcoin will be strongly outperforming any altcoins. Bitcoin will probably be even or a little bit down, maybe a little bit up, but I don't expect any major action for a year or two.
Yeah, I'm afraid Alexander is right. I tend to be overly optimistic, and I really hope Bitcoin will surprise us. And of course, the halving is coming, so who knows? But I'm also afraid that the halving will have less of an effect, with the size of the players getting involved in the ecosystem. So I tend to agree with, the raising of rates is here to stay. If the ECB or the Fed says something, you better listen to them because they're going to do it, even if it's nonsense and very dangerous.
Awesome. Well, I will say this in closing. My good friend over at Pantera Capital, Dan Moorhead, wrote an article, and he said that Bitcoin would bottom on December 30th of 2022. He said that his analysis shows that a year and 3 months before the halving is when Bitcoin bottoms, and a year and 3 months after the halving is when it tops. So we're going to see what happens. That's from Dan Moorhead at Pantera Capital. So you folks can look at that. We'll find that article. We'll put that in the show notes so that you can get it. But that's what he said. My fingers are crossed. I'm not hopeful. So
we'll see.
With that, guys, I thank you both for being on the show. Thanks for doing this, Alex. I really appreciate it. Again, everyone, please Alex and Bitcoin Live so that you guys can stay up on everything. And hey, let's have a good weekend.
Thanks so much, man. Thanks, guys.